Hi there, and welcome back to another Ready, Set, Change podcast. I'm excited today to share with you my guest, Dennis or Denny Zajac, PhD in Industrial and Organizational Psychology, and he has a minor in statistics. He has had a really interesting career. He's worked for large companies such as Accenture, CSC, Capgemini, and he's also been an external consultant for a number of years for many different projects. He's also been really on the cutting edge of some of the leading information about what was called organizational commitment, which we now talk about very frequently as employee engagement. So welcome, Denny. I'm thrilled to have you here on the Ready, Set, Change podcast.
And thanks, April, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I was very much looking forward to this and have enjoyed our previous conversations. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be here. And let's have a good discussion today.
I'm thrilled to have you because I feel like industrial and organizational psychology is like the foundation of the change management, what we call today change management area. And, there is such a broad scope of interests. I think that people who are in change management, like we have some folks who are very interested in kind of the HR side of the world, right? And they're thinking really about, people very focused on their personal individual experiences. And then we have, this wide range of interests all the way, over to the science and the data and, even thinking about the neuroscience. And so it makes me kind of wonder, based on your experience, you've had so many years of experience, although I can hardly tell because you don't look a day over 25, just like me. After so many years of experience, though, I guess I have a question about if you were to advise somebody who's pursuing, they're an undergrad, right? And they think they aren't really sure what to do. They like teaching, but they like science. They enjoy discovering new ideas. And if you were to advise them why they should go into change management, what kinds of characteristics do you think would fit well for a change management career? I mean, is it just anybody can do it, or do you think there's a particular sort of set of attributes or characteristics that those who are successful in organizational change management may tend to have?
Wow. Interesting question, April. For me, right, we've talked about the background in IO psychology, which I think lends itself very well to doing organizational change management work. But I have worked with a number of other people, without an IO background. No, it could be all kinds of different backgrounds, economics, business, whatever,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Who are fantastic practitioners as well. Um, so, so I'll start personally for me. And this might sound a little hokey, but if there's a desire, actually, I'm gonna back up. I was on a project where it was a couple years after another ERP SAP project, right, where there was an evaluation because they weren't making as much progress as the company desired, in terms of people really using the SAP solution as much as desired, to get its full benefits out of it. And one of the things we did was we looked at the characteristics of the, for lack of a better term right now, is that people have heard the term super user, right?
Mhm. Yes.
right? So we were looking at super users, which were the SAP folks who were the kind of the using the system more knowledge about it, and were the go-to individuals for employees to go to if they had questions, they ran into problems using the system, whatever it might be. And I remember a couple of the things that really surfaced to the top when we looked at the super users who were most successful and the business areas were doing better than others. There were a couple of qualities that jumped out for them. And one is they wanted to help people. They just they were just they they just were these, there's folks that just want to help people, right? Uh, and the other characteristic that really jumped out is they they were just curious. They liked to figure things out, right? So they were people who like to solve problems, right? So if somebody came to, hey, I can't figure that, what's going, I don't know why I can't finish this transaction or what, right? These are the people, oh, this is good, I can figure this problem out and I can help these people get their work done. And those were the two by far most important characteristics that came out of the analysis with it. Those were the best super users in the particular areas we're doing better. I think it's the same thing for org change. You have to give a darn. If you're not the kind of person who actually is concerned about someone else, it's right, and that just it has to be genuine. You have to really be want to help somebody feel better about what they're doing, feel more productive, more satisfied at work, those kinds of things. And you have to be you really have to be curious and wanting to figure things out and solve problems with things. So if you're not that personality type, right, you're not somebody that wants to put yourself in the shoes of the other individuals to just kind of try to understand what their perspectives are with things. You need to be open, right, about things. Right, I'm sure you've experienced a lot, right, on clients, especially with managers and executives, right? They think they've done certain things. It's like, well, why don't they get this, right? Why aren't they supporting it? Why don't they want to, be engaged in the change, right? How could they, it's kind of like, and especially if you're in a technology area, right? The general ideas. We would always joke, if we build it, they will come, right? It's like the Field of Dreams, right? It's the it's well, any reasonably, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard any reasonably intelligent person would see this is the right thing to do, right? Right? It's like it's not all about that, right?
Yeah,
So yeah.
I agree with you, Denny. I have to tell you that yes, and that's why I think HR professionals, I think people who've been in education, I think, IO psychology, I think some project professionals are very drawn to organizational change for exactly that reason, that they're putting themselves in someone's shoes and they care and they're trying to solve a problem. And yes. I remember a project I worked on where the employees were spending their own money on their credit cards to, pay for expenses to go essentially do work trips. And with the new implementation of a new financial system, the reimbursement system was not working. And everybody seemed to not think this was a big deal, except the change management team, which was worried about people getting hit with credit card interest and having to carry a balance on their cards because they couldn't get reimbursed for their work expenses. And it was a real issue for the end users, But yes, I found it amazing that those who were higher up in the organization didn't seem to understand the stress that this was putting on our frontline team members. It was a great amount of stress. And yet, I think there was a lack of maybe recognition of even something as basic as, people who are in the upper tiers of leadership have higher salaries and they don't struggle with the credit card balance maybe as much as somebody who's has a lower salary and has to make sure they're paying off that card. And so I thought that was an interesting find, that was really not an issue to the leadership, but it was a big issue for frontline leaders themselves.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's a lot of it. I think what you're saying also for me, the way I'm interpreting it is you need to understand, right? You need to understand those different perspectives and willing to understand those different perspectives and really genuinely understand and be able to translate those, right? To be able to translate those to the other, and the sponsors, the managers, the executives, so that they can remember and appreciate. I don't say remember, right? But appreciate what it does mean to these other folks, right? Right. And whether or not they do appreciate it is another thing, but I think you need to be the type of person to be willing to make a good attempt of making that translation and pointing out to folks those different experiences and points of view with it. Yeah.
I love that term, that it's that translation piece, because so many times it really does feel like that, doesn't it? Like you're
Uh,
translating a problem that somebody just is not grasping as to why is this a problem,
mhm.
and you have to figure out how do you explain that. How have you what other ways have you used like that image or that thought of like translating information, from like the technical team to end users?
Yeah, another great question, and to me also for an organizational change practitioner, right? A lot of the organizational changes are driven by technology, and that's only going to increase, right? With AI, robotics, whatever it is now, it's only just increasing. So it's not just ERP projects, or things like SAP or Oracle, whatever it might be. I mean, it's only going to continue to increase. And so if a practitioner is working with or for um, an organization such as a Capgemini Invent or Accenture, Deloitte, whatever it might be, right? I was on a project where at one point I became the overall project lead, the program lead for a major deployment, a project go live. And so I was not only, so I had the data folks, the functional team, um, right? I had the entire group for the client and for the consulting firm. And April, I was so nervous. It was a good thing as I had some experience with the client at this particular location, and I had a discussion with them beforehand before I accepted the position. I said, I'm a org change knucklehead. I don't know all these other things, but actually for them it was fine because they said they want to be able to understand what the technology changes were, what it meant to them in terms of their business operations. And they said they thought that I could do that. And I think a lot of the org change, a lot of the org change focus is on that translation with the technical team and what it means in business terms. And um, it, one time I was pulled into, yeah, and I would say this was actually a government project, and it was pretty intense. Um, we were getting close to, actually, we had actually gone live with this new system, and they were running into some problems. And the client, the government project lead said, "Hey, Colonel so and so needs to understand X, Y, and Z. What's going on?" And this was April. This was literally a couple minutes before the meeting, before this stand where we had literally where you would do stand. People were standing, so you'd go through things every morning to make sure things were functioning well, identifying issues needed to be addressed, etc. And so the government lead pulled me and said, "Hey, Colonel so and so needs to address X, Y, and Z. We need to do it for the stand up." So I went in and we grabbed a couple of the SAP consultants, and the colonel asked, "What's going on with these particular items?" And there were three of the SAP experts, and they responded in a way with a bunch of acronyms, right? Peppered with a couple verbs every I don't know what it was. And the colonel looked at me and said, and I will change some of the terminology because you can imagine what they use in this environment. Said, "What the heck did they just say?" And I felt horrible, right? Because I didn't know going into this. I just wanted to grab this subject matter experts, pull them in, and the colonel said, "What the heck did they just say?" And he looked at them, and the SAP folks said, "Get the heck out of here." And fortunately, by that point, I had learned enough about what things did mean and was able to translate it for the colonel with it. And for folks that have worked on a lot of these technology projects, right? It's a lot of times it does become, what's the beauty of the architecture, the solution, whatever it might be with it. But those individuals sometimes, are not necessarily they're not translating things into the business terms. So,
Yes.
right. And it's one of the, it's interesting, very interesting questions because I don't think people talk about that enough. Right. That there's a couple things to me for doing organizational change management, especially the technology-driven changes, that we don't talk enough about. We don't talk enough about doing that translation and how important it is to be able to roll up your sleeves and understand what's going on with the technology, and then be able to translate that into the business terminologies those folks understand. The other thing that I don't think we talk enough about is at the front end for driving change. A lot of the methodologies, right? A lot of the frameworks more or less assume that the input is we've got what the change is. A lot of times we do not know what the change is. We do not understand what the business changes are, what's changing in terms of business processes, what types of new skills, knowledge, skills, and abilities are required for things, those kinds of things. So to me, it's one of the things actually, April, jumped out early when I started doing this work, actually with Accenture, is that, right, it's like, we need to define what the change is in the first place. Right.
Right.
So I think, and I would say, I've always been thinking about doing a asking practitioners, how much time do you spend, doing stakeholder management, executive sponsorship, communications, training, but right. But, at the front end, it's defining what's changing in the first place. Like, how do you move people from point A to point B if
Right.
you don't
You
know
don't know what it is.
Yeah, but I think a lot of practitioners need to do that, but we don't talk about that enough, in my opinion.
So I totally agree with you. And the standard for change management evaluate the change impact and organizational readiness, which is our 5.1 process group. 5.1.1, define the change, right? 5.1.2, define why the change is required. Like boom, boom, it's right there in the standard first two things. And yet I agree with you. I have been on a number of changes where I come in very late because nobody thinks they need change management. Suddenly everything's off the rails. They say, oh no, somebody go find that change management person. I come in and they say, oh, we're about to go live in 3 weeks and here's where we are. And I say, well, what is this change? Can you tell me why we're doing it? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. They all just look at each other. I don't know. Why are we doing it? Someone told us to do it. So I agree with you, Denny. I totally agree. Well, I feel like I could talk with you for about 100 years and we would have great alignment and agreement on many things. But I do want to start to wrap us up. I just wanted to think about, if you were advising somebody who's brand new in the world of change management and you are thinking back on all of the projects you've done and the experience you've had, I'll ask you 2 questions. Number 1, what would be your best piece of advice for them to help them grow in their career? And number 2, I wanted to ask if you have any book recommendations based on your extensive collection and what you've been doing for the last 30 years or so. I'd like to just hear your thoughts about, what would you give somebody who's really brand new as a good piece of advice?
So thanks again. Interesting questions.
Feel free to start with the books if you need to.
Maybe I'll start with the advice. Our youngest daughter actually went into organizational change at Accenture in the federal practice. She's now at Meta doing product management work, product development work. But I talked to her. She was a business undergraduate major. Was actually, I'm happy to say, it was into statistics as well, which now a lot of it in organizations is analytics, we're calling it. But what I was saying to her is, what I said to her, and when you're just getting into it, right? It's you don't know what you don't know. So you just get a broad experience, understand how organizations really operate. And that's a very nice thing, as you know, with consulting is if you go the consulting route, you could be spending a lot of time developing PowerPoint slides, taking notes in meetings, etc. But you're also being exposed to and understanding how companies really operate, right? The different functions in the companies, different industries, and how they might be similar or different. So it's just understanding that that's what you will mostly get out of it early on with things. So I just think that's a great experience if you can get it. And realize that if you work for a particular company, right, then all that experience is going to be limited to that particular company and that industry you're in. But just try to learn as much as you can in that situation while you have the opportunity with it. So and if you're just starting out, right, if you're coming in just as an undergrad, you tend to be in the mode of just taking everything in anyway, right, of just learning things. So you kind of you're primed for that kind of experience. But I would recommend trying to learn what you can about different org change management frameworks and approaches, right? There's certainly different tools that you can learn, and that's important foundationally. with folks, but I think until you're practicing um, organizational change management for a while, then you start realizing at some point that, there's an art to it as well, right? And I really think it's could be difficult for people young getting into the area because you've got to get the experience with it. You've got to really confirm whether or not you've got interest in it and really you
Yeah.
want to pursue it because you have to have, you have to have thick skin in many situations uh, with it because you end up. I think if you're doing a good job, you're pushing people, right, to see things differently, etc. So, you know, um, so early on, I just say get some experience, understand that you could be spending some time focused on generating fancy PowerPoints or working on very complicated spreadsheets and those kinds of things, but be able to sit back and just take it all in and learn different methodologies and frameworks with it. I think one of the things in consulting, right, is different firms, right? Different consultancies have their approach. It's kind of interesting to me that uh, especially young practitioners are only familiar with their particular firm's approach.
Mhm.
Um, and certainly you need to do that. You need to understand it. You need to practice their approach with it early on, but make sure you're open-minded and understand different perspectives and different frameworks that can be used with things. So does that make sense?
Oh, it does make sense. Yes,
Uh,
completely. Yeah, I
uh,
think of all the analysts, the young analysts I've had, coming from consulting groups too. Sometimes they're assigned to assist with some analysis pieces and they
mhm,
only know their approach. And so it's
yeah.
always an opportunity. I like the opportunity to share with them other approaches and methodologies that exist because it is important to have a good broad frame, I think, to
Mhm,
choose from.
mhm, yeah, yeah. Yeah, because yeah, there's pluses and minuses with all these different approaches with things, and
Mhm.
you need to be open to understanding what those are. A-
Absolutely.
and then in terms of some books, that at least personally for me, actually, the first one this is making me think of from this your last question, um, is was it Adam Grant's book, Think Again? Actually, I got a bunch of these different books
Adam
sitting
Grant
here.
has Think Again.
Think
Yes.
Again.
Yep.
Have you read that book?
No, I
You
love
from
his books. I have not read that one yet.
yeah, and the one of the things one of the things he talks about is like, intelligence, more or less traditionally, has been defined as um, thinking, reasoning, and learning. Um, but he argues that today we should perhaps think about it because of um, all the complexities and the rapid changing of everything in terms of we should think of intelligence in terms of um, rethinking and unlearning.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and I really resonate with that, I certainly have some bias because it's basically he talks about one of the things he talks about is thinking more of a scientist, and you don't have to be a pure scientist, right? It's just a matter of challenging things, and not just accepting what somebody says, just on face value. What
Mhm.
you need to dive in and understanding, research things your own, and make your own decisions with things. So that I just and think more of a researcher, a scientist with things. So I really like his book. And let me look here. I actually got my little stack here because April, you can probably guess from our discussions, it's kind of hard for me to pick one thing. Um, But folks that know, Edgar Schein recently
Yes,
passed away.
yes,
Unfortunately, just a pillar and just a great resource for understanding organizational culture.
yes.
Um, and he and his son have a relatively recent book called Humble. Well, there's two, but the one in particular, Humble Inquiry. Humble
Mm,
Inquiry. Um, and it's about a lot of it is about how you in consulting you approach situations. It's kind of similar to Adam Grant in my mind, that you don't go in with the solution like you already know what the solution is. And you gotta you're going in and you're really asking a lot of questions, and we talk about that in consulting.
mhm.
I think in some situations, particularly in if you're working for a big consulting firm, for me, maybe limiting career options for me
Mhm.
by saying this, but right, that you need to come across as confident, and this is exactly what the solution is, and uh, but we all know that's not the case, right? Right, but you need to come across that way in certain situations. So, um, I just got the book Humble Inquiry. I'm really looking forward to reading it because I there was a actually I think a podcast that they had Edgar and Peter with somebody, and I just thought it just made so much sense, and I think it's really nice for consultants when you get to a point where you can really challenge clients by asking the right questions and
Mhm.
working through to come up with a solution with them, as opposed to, you're being hired in to tell them exactly what to do, because it's not that easy. That's a book. Another one is this different topics. Next Generation Performance Management: The Triumph of Science Over Myth and Superstition by Alan Colquitt. Um,
Mm.
that's more specific to my background in IO psychology, because I think most performance management systems and companies is a total mess. They're a total mess.
Mhm.
We don't apply what we know about psychology for performance management in general. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes, or most of the time, that's driven because certain technologies are being used to
Mm.
drive how
That's
people do
interesting.
performance management, right?
Ah,
But there are basic things about employee perceptions of fairness of performance management. I bet you if you were to ask most HR practitioners, they couldn't tell you what those factors are.
mm.
And
Interesting.
people who designed the technologies, the systems used for performance management couldn't tell you either. Um, and then
Well,
another book I think is absolutely fantastic, which is the thing I'm getting more and more involved in which is more evidence-based and science-based org change management. It's called Reconsidering Change Management: Applying Evidence-Based Insights in Change Management Practice,
mm.
by Stephen Tenhave, I think, and a couple other folks with it, where he goes back and looks at a bunch of practices in org change management and said, hey, we're doing these things. What's the evidence that supports them or doesn't? Is
Love
there
it.
really evidence that
Mhm.
supports them or not? And another that's somewhat related to that is the science of organizational change with Paul Gibbons. And Paul Gibbons is actually um, he and Trisha Kennedy are coming out with a new book soon, publishing something called Change Myths,
Mm. Interesting.
which I'm really looking forward to. I know both of them. They do some great work. I don't know if you're familiar with them. I think overall for org change management, for us to progress the discipline, the profession, we've been doing it long enough now, even though it's a
Yeah.
relatively young area, science profession,
Mhm. Mhm.
uh, compared to other areas. I think we're at the point where to progress the profession, we need to sit back and look at some of the things that folks are doing, what data supports or doesn't support those things,
Mhm.
and let's try to focus a little bit more on practices where there's more evidence that they're actually um, helpful for. because I think some cases we could actually be doing some harm in organizations. It's certainly not progressing the profession with things.
Love
Things that
it.
you and I've talked about communications. Maybe one of the next sections we do is around some of the topics about sponsorship or communications,
Mhm.
for some things that are maybe a little bit more difficult to actually implement. Some things that we know better,
Right.
but when you get into a particular
Try
client
to do.
situation, it
Mhm.
becomes very difficult to do to
Yes.
actually implement what we know is better. So those are
Yes.
the kinds of things I'm really interested in. I would love to talk with you later um, about.
It does.
Yeah,
Well, I certainly have enjoyed our time together today, and I appreciate, not only the excellent book recommendations, but also your examples and experience and thoughts about organizational change management. It's very helpful to have these conversations so that we can ensure that, we are advancing the profession, which is the goal.
thank you very much, April. Yeah, appreciate it, and look forward to talking again.
Excellent. Thank you.